Hello, everybody, and welcome to Decoding the WSL, the podcast dedicated to the stats and facts in the WSL. Feels a bit weird to be saying that now. I'm very much been used to saying decoding the Euros for the last month or so, but the Euros is over. Obviously, it was a fantastic event for us English folk, and it is back into the WSL. We are coming at you throughout August with 12 episodes, one per team, having a look at the season ahead, how we think they're going to get on, given any changes over the summer, all that sort of stuff. We're going to kick it off by talking about Tottenham. Tottenham is our first episode, and who better to have on with me tonight than our resident Tottenham fan? It's Jacob Bernstein. Jacob, how excited are you to talk all about Spurs?
I am excited. As you said, it feels weird because we're just coming back. We're coming off the back of the Euros win. I'm not quite expecting the joy of England for Spurs in the upcoming season, but yeah, I'm looking forward to kind of switching attention back to WSL and hoping that kind of the success of the Lionesses will bring kind of more attention to the WSL next season.
Yeah, and I guess for your sake, also bringing a bit more success to Spurs because last season was not the most successful season. Well, I guess men's or women's for Spurs. So the only way really is up from there. Last season for the women, you finished 11th out of 12 in the WSL, got knocked out of the FA Cup in the fourth round and reached the quarterfinal of the Subway Cup. I think the main problem for Spurs last season was probably struggling for goals. There was obviously Beth England, who did fantastically, and she was the top scorer for the team, but she struggled with injury throughout the season. And then while she wasn't there, Spurs didn't score many goals from open play. There was a few free kicks and penalties and headers and corners and things like that. But I guess goal scoring was maybe the key factor. That's what I sort of took from the season. What about you? What was the sort of sticking point from the 24-25 season?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's really difficult to pinpoint it down. I think going back to the 23-24 season, we obviously had quite a lot of relative success. We finished sixth. We obviously had that magical FA Cup run in Robert Villaham's first season when we got to the FA Cup final. And despite the loss, Spurs' first appearance in the FA Cup final was monumental for the club. And to have that day out at Wembley was really special. And there was so much hope going into the season. Robert Villahammer had spoken about how we were going to build on it, and hopefully this was a season that would bring us closer to those top four teams. And it just didn't really happen. It's, again, as I said, it's hard to pin down why. I think one factor is the big loss of both Grace Clinton and Celine Bizet in the summer. I think maybe we didn't realise how big of a loss they both would be. And yeah, I think we started the season relatively okay. We had some good results against the bottom sides, and then from January onwards, it was really, really disastrous. In the second half of the season, we only won one game, which was against Crystal Palace, who were relegated. We went on a 10-game run towards the back end of the season where we didn't win. And yeah, we really struggled for goals. Beth England was our top scorer with 8 WSL goals, and second was Evelina Simonon with 3. And there was a period in, I think it was March, April time, where Beth England was injured, and we really, really struggled for goals. So I think that's something that we need to keep an eye on. And I mean, it's still early days. We're currently recording this at the end of July, beginning of August, and there's still a month and a bit to go until the WSL season starts. So I'm hoping that we can kind of bring in some attacking players, because I think that was, yeah, probably where our weakness lied.
Yeah, as it's the start of the summer and Spurs haven't been overly active so far. There haven't been many transfers to talk about, but maybe the major transfer to talk about is the change in manager. Obviously, Robert Villaham lost his job around the same time as Ange, obviously at the end of last season, and Martin Ho, former assistant at Manchester United, so has a little bit of experience in the WSL, albeit has been managing elsewhere. I think in Norway over the last period of time is coming in. There's been a bit of change as CEO. Former Arsenal CEO is taking over, which is another sort of interesting development at Spurs. And I think the sort of we'll get to the players in a moment, but the sort of management side of it, there's been a bit of change at Spurs, hasn't there? maybe the key factor. That's what I sort of took from the season. What about you? What was the sort of sticking point from the 24-25 season?
Yeah, I think the change is exciting. I think you mentioned before kind of Ange and Robert Villahamn got sacked at a very similar time. And I think, yeah, it was a difficult year for Tottenham as a club as a whole. And to kind of sack two managers in the space of what was 3 days at the time is not a great reflection on the board. But yeah, I think based off of the end of last season, I think it was the right decision for Robert Villahamn to go. And that I can't say that I know that much about Martin Ho, but from what I've researched and from kind of listening to what he's said on his interviews and how he looks, I'm relatively excited. I mean, he is English. He has managed as an assistant in the WSL. He's managed at Everton and United as the coaching assistant. So I think that's a positive that he brings experience in the WSL. He then managed in Norway between 2023 and 2025 for SK Brann. SK Brann under Martin Ho became the first club from Norway to reach the Champions League group stages. They finished in the 2023-2024 season second in their group in the Champions League, and then went out to Barca in the quarterfinals. So, I mean, obviously facing Barca is difficult, so there's an achievement there. In 2024, Martin Ho led Brann to a second place finish, and in the 2025 season, Brann were second when Martin Ho left. I think having watched his kind of intro interview as he joined, I think he preaches kind of his philosophy as something that's not too dissimilar to Robert Villahamn. So I think that's one positive, is that in an ideal scenario, we're not drastically changing the way we play. I think he wants to play a possession-based game. A lot of coaches will say it, that kind of attacking front forward football. Yeah, he wants the kind of fans to be engaged, people to be on the edge of their seats. He wants there to be variation, tactical flexibility, and yeah, he said that he believes that fans are a huge development to the success of the team. He is a big believer on individual and team development. And one thing that he mentioned at the end of his interview was he kind of was excited to have games at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, and has kind of pushed for there to be more games at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium in the future. And I think that's something that's really important. We've obviously seen there be quite a big movement with other teams like Arsenal to play kind of the majority, if not all of their games at the Emirates. And obviously the kind of big move from Everton to have all their games at Goodison Park now next season. And I think, yeah, this is maybe speaking to a wider point, but I think Spurs really missed the mark last season with the games that they put on at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. The season before, so 23-24, was really successful for kind of bringing in the fans. We had the North London derby win against Arsenal in December 2023 at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. We had the FA Cup semi-final against Leicester in April 2024. Two really important games, whereas last season, we played 3 games at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium against Arsenal, United, and Chelsea. We lost all 3. We didn't score a goal in any of those games. And I just think that's a really bad advert for kind of encouraging that fan base and trying to grow the fan base. Speaking on Vinay Venkatesan, obviously kind of came from Arsenal. I think from what I've seen of him so far, I'm very encouraged and excited by his appointment. I think when he was at Arsenal, he was a driver for women's football at Arsenal. And I think it's very encouraging that already in his short stint at Tottenham, we've seen a lot from Vinay. He's been kind of a face of the club already. He's engaged in quite a few interviews, one with Daniel Levy, one about kind of when Thomas Frank was hired on the men's side. He also did an interview when Martin Ho was appointed, as to kind of the approach that Tottenham took to appoint Martin Ho. And I think that's like a really good sign that we're kind of getting an insight into why he was appointed. Vinay Venkatesan kind of said they kind of the Spurs board looked at what characteristics they wanted out of a manager. There were a couple of people involved in the decision making, Andy Rogers and Rebecca Capelhorn. I actually went to event that Spurs Women hosted back in May, where Rebecca Capelhorn, who is part of the Tottenham board, she spoke. She's a big advocate and probably the biggest advocate on the Tottenham board on the women's side. Andy Rogers and Rebecca Capelhorn both evaluated a long list of candidates for the Spurs manager job based on variety of characteristics, and Martin Ho was the top candidate due to his experience in the WSL as an assistant and also at Brann. They mentioned a couple of things that Martin Ho also mentioned in his video in regard to his tactics and also his kind of communication with players, fans, and the media. And I think there was a match of Martin Ho's ambition and the club's ambition. So I think on the surface, I'm very excited about the changes, but I think maybe we'll get into the squad as this podcast goes on, because maybe that's where my concern lies at the moment.
Yeah, the squad hasn't changed too much so far, which I think is perhaps unsurprising when you've got a new manager come in. We've seen some teams be quite active in the window so far, but it's more the teams that have got a manager already in place. So you're thinking about like Arsenal and Chelsea, for example. Everton with Brian Sorensen obviously is still there. They've all been quite active, mostly buying. There's a few that have left those clubs as well, whereas Spurs have gone for a slightly different tactic so far anyway, where it's more keeping the players on. There's actually been quite a lot of new contracts for current players. I think 9 at the last count, or sort of at the time of recording anyway. And they include quite major players like Molly Bartrip, Ash Neville, Martha Thomas, Kit Graham, Olga Atinen. So it's going to be a similar sort of side to last season. There aren't that many departing players so far. Rosella Ayan and Becky Spencer have moved on, and I believe Hayley Rasso is going, although I don't think that's been announced yet. But football's worst kept secret, I think, at this point. But so far, you've got just the one incoming player, which is 19-year-old Toka Koga. Can you tell me much about her?
Yeah, I can. She's a 19-year-old Spanish defender who came from Feyenoord. She joined Feyenoord and played at the Dutch top flight from 18, having made 35 appearances for Feyenoord. Scored on 3 occasions as Feyenoord finished 5th in the table last season and also reached the semi-final of their domestic competition. She's been a mainstay in the last 2 years in the Japan national team, started all 4 games in their 2024 Olympic campaign, and in 2025 she featured in all 3 of Japan's She Believes Cup fixtures and actually scored the winning goal against the US to help Japan win that. She's had 19 caps for her country and scored 3 times. I think, it's interesting because Toko Kogo was brought in before Martin Ho, so I'm interested kind of how that happens, because I think usually you kind of want a manager's seal of approval before you bring in new signings. And I think I'm not entirely sure if she will be a first team player or whether she'll kind of be more on the bench. I think Molly in the kind of central defensive positions, Molly Bartrip has kind of cemented herself as that kind of starting defender. She started every game and actually played every single minute of the last WSL season. And then there's almost that spot, that kind of second centre-back slot that needs to be filled for Tottenham. I think there are options. I think Luana Bula actually didn't play that much last season. I think she's a quality player, but through injury and just being out of favour in general, she didn't play. I think she played 6 WSL matches. So I think there is a spot. We've also saw Josephine Rybrink kind of come into the centre-back position in the second half of the season. But I think, there's a player that can fit into that second centre-back slot for Tottenham, and it could be Toko Koga. So, I'm excited for her to see what she's like. And then I guess just speaking more broadly on those kind of contract extensions that you mentioned, I think my feelings are a bit mixed on some of them. I think there are some players that you mentioned, like Ashley Neville, like Molly Bartrip, who I think they played such an important part in our season last season, and it feels like a reward that they've had their contracts extended. But there are some players that been left questioning as to maybe why they had their contracts extended. Most notably, I guess Josephine Rybrink came in on a 6-month initial loan in January. I didn't think she was overly impressive, and then has had her contract extended. Olga Artinen, I actually really like Olga Artinen, but she was brought in by Robert Villahammer and has just been out of favour for 2 years. I think she did sustain an MCL injury in 23-24, and has kind of been struggling to get back into the side since. And there were also rumours that Olga Artinen may have been leaving in January. But I guess it's a new regime, so that may have been resolved. And then Martha Thomas is a really difficult one. I think the story of Martha Thomas is that she had such a strong start to 23-24, scored, I think she scored 7 goals in the first couple of months of that season, and then was just off the boil as soon as Beth England came back from her injury in 23-24. And then Martha Thomas didn't score a WSL goal in 24-25, and it was a really disappointing campaign for her. Which, yeah, I guess makes me slightly question the fact that Tottenham extended her contract by 3 years.
Yeah, Martha Thomas is one that I've actually got to sort of a note to talk about her a bit later on as well. But I'm intrigued to see what she's going to be like because, yeah, like you say, she didn't have a great 24-25 season. I think she was the player that had the most shots and accumulated the most XG in the WSL without scoring. But like you say, when she gets in form, yeah, I think it was something like 7 goals. I think it's 6 games that she scored those 7 goals in. She was really on form at the start of the previous season. So there was obviously a lot of confidence in her then. Maybe my thought is that the confidence might have been knocked when Beth England came back, and maybe getting a fresh contract might help her confidence. I don't know much about this contract. I don't know how long it is, etc. It might only be a year with an option, that kind of thing, to see, if she can get herself back into form, then great. But she's a player with decent WSL experience. She's obviously an international as well with Scotland. So I think if it's not costing the club too much money, it's sort of worth taking a risk on. It's not like you're flooded with players in that kind of position. So I can sort of see why, but I can see both arguments to it as such with Martha Thomas.
I was
So I wanted to say
going
on,
to add.
brilliant.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to add in terms of the details. It was a 3-year contract until 2028.
Oh, right. Oh, so they are really committing to her. Well, they must be confident in her.
Yeah.
I was going to go back to Tukakoga because one thing I wanted to say on her was that you've got a 19-year-old coming in. She's already started or featured 19 times for her country. She's not even 20 yet. And for Japan as well, this is the Japan side. Japan side aren't bad. Like, they beat Spain, I think, at the last World Cup, didn't they? The one that Spain won. They are, a team that have beaten USA, like you mentioned. She scored the winner in the final. She could be this like young starlet coming through. I'm not saying that she's going to go win the Ballon d'Or, but it certainly seems that she has a really high ceiling. So it might be one of those players that the board take charge on and say, look, it doesn't matter what manager we get in. This player is going to be a star. She's worth getting in. I'm assuming that they've got her on a decent deal and stuff like that as well. So it's been worth their while. It's not like she's come over for a world record fee, So I think it's probably worth the club taking a risk. Because Spurs, for me at the moment, are a club that need to start taking some risks, because if you don't, I think you're just going to keep slipping down the table. And if you're already 11th, and this season, I think, as we've discussed a few times, there's no obvious 12th place candidate. You really need to pull something out to take a risk and get a reward to avoid the dreaded relegation back down. Let's have a look ahead to the expectations for next season then. I've sort of split it into 3. So potential star players, potential breakthrough players, and then finally, where do we think they're going to finish in the league? And if you've got any other hot takes, go for it. But potential star players for the season, for me, I've put 3 down. I think Beth England is an obvious one. She was the star player last season. She's probably going to be the star player again this season. She's not past it. So I think she's going to be banging in the goals as long as she stays fit. The other 2 that I've put is Evelina Summanen. We know that she was, second top scorer with 3 last season, but I think she took on a bit of the creativity role that was lost when Grace Clinton left. Grace Clinton did it a lot through her carries, whereas Sumanen did it much more through her passing. And I think with Spurs looking a little bit weaker over this season than they did the previous season, teams aren't going to be sitting back as much against Spurs and they could be going forward, which then leaves a few more gaps for someone like Sumanen to potentially find holes for progressive passes and key passes and things like that. So I think she could be someone that has a really good season, because I think she's already a great player. And the other one I think is Lisa Kopp, hence I put this shirt on for a reason. I think she was a really good buy from Leicester. Leicester had two really good goalkeepers, um, and yeah, aren't necessarily the sort of team that need to. Spurs, I think, really needed a new goalkeeper. I think as great as Becky Spencer has been, they needed an upgrade, and Lisa Kopp has been a really good upgrade. And yeah, I think she could be really important. I think I should have written this down, but I think she overachieved on her goals prevented last season. So she's like an above average goalkeeper within the league, and that's exactly the sort of thing you need, because a realistic ambition, I think, for Spurs this season is going to be getting into the top half, and players like Lisa Kopp are going to be helping towards that. But yeah, those are my three players that I think could be the star players for Spurs at the end of this season. Who was on your list?
Yeah, I agree on all of them. To be fair, I think Beth England was really important for us last season. Obviously, from a goal scoring perspective, we've spoken about that, but also from a leadership perspective, I think just kind of seeing the way she kind of dictates the team and leads team talks and kind of just encourages players on the pitch. I think she's a proper leader, and you really feel her presence when she's not there. I think. We have good other attacking players. Like I think, obviously, we spoke that probably Hayley Razzo is going to leave, but players like Hayley Razzo, Martha Thomas, and Jess Naz, I think they're all good players. I just think maybe. Yeah, they didn't have the best of seasons last season, and that kind of contributed to the disappointment that was our 11th place finish. I kind of noted down three more players that I think could be key players or will be key players in the upcoming season. The first one is Ashley Neville. I think it always surprises me how almost under the radar Ashley Neville goes. How under the radar Ashley Neville is. And yeah, I mean, if you just look at the stats, she shines in a lot of the defensive stats. She had the most tackles in the WSL for the 24-25 season with 96, the second most blocks with 45, and the most interceptions with 44. So that's three key metrics, three key defensive metrics that she's kind of top or second in. I spoke on Molly Bartrip before. I think was a key part of our squad in 24-25. She played every WSL minute, as I mentioned. And I think, she's in the leadership team as well. She's our vice captain. And I think will be really important in the upcoming season as well. And playing consistently is very key. I think I've said it on the podcast before. I think it's a very underrated asset to be able to kind of play every single minute. And then the last one that I've kind of picked up on is Maite Oroz. I think she's one of my favorite players. I think it maybe wasn't clear last season exactly what her role would be. I think maybe people thought she'd come in as a more of a 10, but she kind of settled as a more deeper midfielder, maybe playing as an 8 more at times. And especially because we've got quite a variety of midfielders with Evelina Simonen, Drew Spence, Olivia Holt coming in January. But Oroz shines in regard to passing. She had an 84.8% pass completion rate in the WSL last season. She was also in the 99th percentile for successful take-ons per 90 compared to WSL midfielders. And I think those are her two main strengths, kind of receiving the ball deep, kind of taking on players, kind of that quick possession passing. And yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing more of Maite Oroz next season.
Yeah, I think she was a player that came in with a good amount of promise, and I know both on and off the podcast you've spoken about her a fair amount, and yeah, I'm looking forward to maybe seeing her get some more minutes in that Spurs side next season. You mentioned Olivia Holt in there. I've got her down as one of my sort of potential breakthrough stars. I know she featured last season, but not much. I think she might be one that, if she starts getting a lot more minutes under her belt, could be really, really important for Spurs. I was at the Spurs Man City game last season. She came on as a sub, And once she came on, she seemed so threatening. I think in that game, she took on more players than anyone else, despite the fact that she'd come on in the second half. So I think she could be someone that, if she starts getting more minutes, obviously she's, another year older now, that sort of stuff. She might be one. And then Togo Kogo, who we've already spoken about a bit, she's a very young centre back. I don't think, other than Molly Bartrip, I don't think there's a centre back that's sort of got a space nailed on. I'd be surprised if Molly Bartrip gets dropped, but for the other space, Claire Hunt, I don't think was great last season. Obviously, we didn't see too much of Rybrink. Violet Buller was out injured for a bit, so there's a space there to be up for grabs. And you've got a player that's already got 19 caps for Germany for Japan, sorry, at age 19. Could well be that they are a superstar, even though we haven't watched it yet. We don't really know what she's like. The promise is there. How about you? Any sort of breakthrough stars you can see coming through? Any youth players, stuff like that?
Yeah, a couple from me. I think the kind of youth players that were more on the fringe and kind of had a couple of starts, a couple of appearances last season, I think could have a big season this season. I think one of them is Eleanor Heaps, who is our reserve goalkeeper. She had a couple of WSL appearances in the mid-season, a couple of appearances in the Subway Cup as well. She's English, she's young, so I'm kind of looking forward to seeing more of her. The group stage draw for the Subway Cup for 25-26 was made today. And in Tottenham's group, we have Aston Villa, Birmingham, and Bristol City. So I think, yeah, that gives a good opportunity, especially the kind of Birmingham and Bristol games, to kind of play more of the youth. I think we saw quite a bit of Lena Gulling-Williams off the bench last season. Obviously, more as like a third attacker following Beth England and Martha Thomas. But I think, there's some real promise from Lena, so I'm looking forward to seeing more of her. And then the third one that I've picked out is an interesting one because I had real high hopes for her. And that's Matilda Wimberg. I think she came to Spurs in 23-24, and I think there was a lot of hope for her, young Swedish winger. And surprisingly, she was just very out of favour last season, which, as I said, surprising, maybe because Robert Villahamn was Swedish and was probably one of the reasons that their kind of country link was probably one of the reasons that she got brought in. It was surprising not to see her get as many minutes as I thought she would. But I think, a kind of new era might give her a chance. And then the one we've got to speak about, who probably won't be a breakthrough star this season, but will be back at some point, whether it's at the end of the season or the season after, is Ella Morris. She obviously had her breakout season this season in 24-25. And then on England camp suffered an ACL injury. So, I'll be surprised if we kind of see her very much, if any, this season. But she was so encouraging, probably one of our best players of the season. And she's young, so I'm looking forward to seeing more of her in, hopefully, for years to come at Tottenham.
Yeah, I think Ella Morris is going to be one of those players that, if Spurs do end up taking that next step, into the top half or maybe even further, she's going to be a leading force behind that. And fully expect that, if Lucy Bronze ends up retiring from England at any point, that Ella Morris may well be the next best person to take over the job, because she was fantastic at Spurs last season. Finally, our sort of the last prediction that I want to do is looking at where we think they're going to finish in the league next season. I'm going to go first because then we finish on yours, which is slightly more positive. I'm going to guess, because as it is, I don't think Spurs are going to be finishing anywhere outside the bottom three. I think that there are a few teams. Last season, there was obviously 12th place in Crystal Palace that was a bit of a drop. And then outside of the top four, there was quite a pack that were close. And I think over the summer, there's been a bit of separation from that. I think teams like Villa and Everton have sort of increased the quality of their squads. And I think there are teams like Spurs who haven't really increased or decreased the quality of their squad. It's just sort of stayed about the same. And I do think with the rate that the women's game is growing, I think there's an element of if you're standing still, you're going backwards because everyone else is going forwards. So I think that the bottom three next season is probably going to be Liverpool, Spurs, and Leicester. In what order, I'm not 100% sure, but I think I probably put at the time of recording. This might change in the next month or so. By the time the season starts, it's the 31st of July at the moment. But I'm going to go Spurs. Probably going to finish 11th. It's also quite hard to know when you've got a new manager coming in as well, because that could be a real positive thing, or it could be a real negative thing, or it could just be somewhere in the middle. But um, Spurs, I think, are probably one of the hardest to predict teams as it stands. I'm going to say 11th, but it wouldn't shock me if you make a few signings, maybe lose a couple more players, but end up 6th, 7th. But we'll have to wait and see. What about you? How are you feeling with the season ahead?
Sadly and unfortunately, I feel quite similarly to you. I think the next month will be very telling as to kind of how I feel going into the season. But as it stands, I'm quite pessimistic. I think in the last 2 years, we've seen kind of Bristol City and Crystal Palace come up and go straight back down, which meant that there was kind of an obvious and quite clear worst team in the league. And we've obviously seen London City Lionesses go up, and there's been a huge investment in their team in regard to they've brought in so much experience. So I expect them to be very strong next season. In terms of Tottenham, yeah, I'm quite worried. I think we could really struggle, and I agree with you. I think it could be between Tottenham and Leicester for those kind of bottom two spots. I think for 25-26, I think we'll stay in the league, and that's just because whoever comes bottom in the WSL plays third place in the WSL2 as a playoff because of that expansion to 14 teams. So I think if it came to that, I believe we'd have the better of whoever came third in WSL2. But I guess the wider problem then is I think there needs to be more investment in the team to kind of stay in the league once it expands to 14 teams and properly compete. I think there needs to be a lot of investment in regard to the attack. We've spoken already on this pod about kind of the lack of goal scoring options, and especially if Hayley Raso leaves. Look, she had a disappointing season for Tottenham, but she has a lot of experience, a lot of quality, and that's losing an experienced head in attack, and it's kind of how do you replace that is the important thing. So yeah, I'm also pretty pessimistic, but I think, as I said, there's still 5-6 weeks to go until the season starts. So can Tottenham Hotspur change my mind, please?
Yeah, I mean, there's still plenty of time for them to make some moves, and for your sake, hopefully they will. Listener, over the summer, we put out a bit of a survey to see what you liked from last season, what you necessarily didn't like, and what we can do more this year. The two main things that came out of that you love is Know Your Stat, which unfortunately we won't be doing today because there's only two of us. But the other one is Fantasy WSL. So we've got a bit of Fantasy WSL. I guess, thoughts ahead of the season. Obviously, we don't have any stats on it yet because the game's not live because there's still quite a way to go. But looking ahead to next season, I thought we could have a look at who we think is like a must-have in your team. If you have to pick a Spurs player, who you're going to pick. And the other one is who do you think might be a good visionary pick? So someone that you don't necessarily think everyone's going to pick, but might still get some points. So for a must-have, I put two on my list. I don't know if I'll necessarily pick either of these when I actually make my team, but if I am going to put a Spurs player in, one or both of these is probably who I'm going to pick. One is Beth England because she's just a bit of a goal machine. Even when Spurs don't play well, she still often gets on the score sheet. The other one is Lisa Kopp because I don't see Spurs getting loads of clean sheets this season. We saw last season that there wasn't actually that many clean sheets in the league generally because a lot of teams are scoring a lot. And obviously the ones that do keep you clean sheets are Hannah Hampton and Jackie Van Domselaar and people like that. But Lisa Cobb, I think, might get a lot of points for saves. I think we've seen her save penalties before as well. So there might be the odd one, if Spurs give away a penalty, that she might get points from that. But I think Lisa Cobb is a really, I've said before, she's the player that's probably above the average level of quality within the Spurs squad. Is probably one of the top half goalkeepers in the league. So even though she's going to be very busy, I think that could then mean that she gets a lot of points for saves. And who knows, maybe there will be a few clean sheets on the way. What about you? Are there any players that you're sort of definitely going to be putting in your team from Spurs?
I picked the exact same two as you, Lisa Kopp and Beth England. I think, yeah, from an attacking perspective, Beth England carried us last season, so I think she's a must-have. And then, yeah, for very similar reasons, I think Lisa Kopp. Yeah, you said about the clean sheets. Yeah, I think it was a disappointing season in regard to kind of keeping clean sheets last year for Tottenham. We kept 2 clean sheets in the season. One was in the opening day 4-0 victory against Palace, which Kopp didn't play because it was before she joined. And when Kopp was at Tottenham, she made 1 clean sheet, which was a 1-0 victory against Leicester in January. So I think, yeah, it depends how we play under Martin Her. I think that's kind of to be seen. But if there are clean sheets in there, I think there's a massive upside to Lisa Kopp because it's not just the clean sheets, but as you said, she's a great shot stopper. So I think she'd get a lot of save points and that leads to bonus points. And yeah, so I think there's a potential for her to have a massive upside.
Yeah, well, I mean, if we're on the same page, maybe we'll see quite a few people pick both of those players. But who do you think might make a good visionary pick? So someone that you don't think is going to be that popular within the game, but could still be someone that gets a decent amount of points.
I think there's two for me. I think it's hard to know the percentage ownership of players. I think the first one would be Evelina Simonen. I think just from looking at her on like fantasy women's Euros, for example, she was priced very low. She was pretty lowly owned on that. She was Tottenham's second biggest contributor in terms of goals and assists last season, 2 goals and 3 assists. And I think, yeah, she can score a free kick. She's usually on set pieces, both free kicks and corners. So I think there's an upside to that if we can score from set pieces. So yeah, I'd firstly go Evelina Simonen. And the second one I'd go is Jess Naz. I think, yeah, it was a disappointing season in 24-25 for Jess Naz. But I think she has a massive upside as well. I think she's a bit of a confidence player, and we kind of saw it in 23-24 a bit more when she just has so much pace and so much energy. I think on her day, her finishing is quality. And I just think if we can kind of build confidence in the squad, I think Jess Naz could really thrive. So yeah, Simonen and Naz are my 2 picks.
Yeah, I think they're both quite good picks, actually. Neither of them are the players that I've put down. I've put down two as well. But Jess Naz is one that, now that you're talking about her a bit more as well, might, if she starts getting played, she might be one that I add in because Spurs haven't got the worst fixtures at the start of the season. You only play one of the sort of like last season's top four within the first 5 games, and that's Man City. So you haven't got any of last season's top 3 in your first 5 games. So she could be one that, even though you haven't necessarily got the easiest game to start, you've got West Ham, could be the sort of, yeah, Spurs the sort of team that you could put some players in because they're going to have a decent run for those first 5 games. The two that I've put that might be a good visionary pick, one is Olivia Holt that I'd mentioned earlier, similar to Jess Naz, I guess. If she starts getting game time, I think she probably will get some output. I wouldn't be surprised to see her on the score sheet or getting some assists. Certainly looking very threatening against any team that she comes up against. But the other one I've put is Martha Thomas. I think this could be one to keep an eye on in pre-season. We saw, as we mentioned earlier, that the season before last, she scored, I think, 7 goals in 6 games at the start of the season. She was in high confidence. She was doing fantastic. She hasn't had a good time since then. So, with her performances last season, I can't see many people putting her in the team. I think she's likely to be a visionary pick. But if she gets some goals in pre-season, gets a bit of confidence, she's been given a 3-year contract, so the club are obviously trying to give her some confidence. See what Martin Ho says to her as well. They used to work together at Manchester United, so she might have a bit of confidence from a familiar face in charge. And I don't know the ins and outs of it. If Martin Ho liked her, maybe she's slightly more likely to play. So yeah, if she can hit form, I wouldn't be surprised to see her get another scoring streak. Maybe not quite as good as 7 goals in such a short space of time. But, she might be getting 5, 6 goals by Christmas, in which case for a visionary pick as well, that's a really good return. But it is a bit of a 50-50. I think it is likely she's either going to be really good or kind of similar to last season. But yeah, I hope it's really good because, I'm also part Scottish. So, maybe that'll be good for the national side as well. Other than that, that's the sort of fantasy WSL section. But I think that's about it for today, Jacob, unless you've got anything else you want to include in your sort of Spurs preview for the season.
No, I think that's it. I think given the state of Spurs women last season, I think this has been a relatively positive podcast. I hope for the listener.
Yeah, well, yeah, I did try and, stayed neutral throughout. I did have to, I did make you might have seen if you were watching on YouTube, I was drinking from a mug earlier. I did make it in my Arsenal mug at the start and then had to pour it into a different one because I thought that wouldn't be very good. But yeah, I feel like you said, it's been a relatively positive pod. I think for Spurs, it looks like, although you didn't have a good season last season, you're not necessarily on the way down. It's not that this season's going to be even worse. It's that you seem to be going through the right kind of motions. You're keeping players on board. You're making a good signing so far. And obviously you've got new staff in as well. So who knows? Might even make top 4 at this rate. But yeah, thank you, listener, for joining us today. Obviously, like I said earlier, this is the first of 12 podcasts that are coming to you in August, 1 per team. I think the next one, I don't know what order I'm going to release them in, probably just in the order that we record them. But TBC on that. But the next one we'll be doing is West Ham. So if West Ham are a team that interests you, or any of the other teams, to be honest, in the WSL, do make sure to hit subscribe or follow wherever you get your podcasts, whether that is Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, wherever. We are video as well as audio. Don't forget you can follow at Decoding the WSL on Instagram as well to stay up to date. And then you can find myself and Jacob both on, you can find me on Instagram. You can find both of us on X/Twitter as well, where we both post quite a lot of stats-based stuff. So if numbers are your thing, stats and facts, I mean, probably are, because that's the reason you're listening to this. Those are the kind of accounts to go and have a look at. Other than that, listener, thank you very much for listening. We will speak to you next week, probably, when you hear the West Ham one. But yeah, thank you, Jacob, for coming on, and we'll see you soon.